As the Kumbh Mela begins next week, millions of pilgrims will congregate at the confluence of the Ganga and Yamuna rivers at Prayagraj, formerly Allahabad. They will stay in a vast temporary city organized by the government. They will witness orders of militant sadhus charging into the river, and they'll pray at Prayagraj's various temples. Today, all of these are emblematic of an eternal, unchanging Hinduism. But in reality, many are recent innovations, the result of colorful turbulence in North India under the Mughals and British over the last 3 centuries. Situated at a gentle bend in the silty plain where the great waterways of the Ganga and Yamuna meet, Prayagraj is a great center of North Indian history. Century after century, rulers made it a point to advertise their power and fame here by commissioning inscriptions read by a literate population of merchants and priests. The Mauryan Emperor Ashoka erected a pillar as early as the 3rd century BC, and independent archaeologist Rudra Vikrama Srivastav, who works in the region, informed me of the presence of Kushan inscriptions dating to the early century CE. They were followed soon after by Samudragupta, who violently conquered the Gangetic plains in the 4th century CE and added a Sanskrit praise poem to himself on Ashoka's old pillar. While all of these tell us that Prayagraj was an trading and population hub, it's not clear when it became a holy site and when the Kumbh Mela actually began. Now, it's possible that some moves in this direction began under the Gupta Empire from the 4th to 6th century CE. The Guptas pioneered a temple-focused Hinduism that encouraged the movement of pilgrims to potent sites. A Gupta feudatory made gifts to Vishnu temples in the neighborhood, suggesting that trade and pilgrimage routes were developing in the 5th century CE, and sometime later the Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang witnessed a great disputation of Buddhist, Hindu and Jain monks there, suggesting that other religions also made a beeline for this great hub. And by the late 11th century, according to an inscription discovered by Srivastav, Bargar near Prayagraj was home to the only known temples of Rama in northern India. But it's only a few centuries later that we get really detailed information about pilgrimage to Prayagraj, and it comes from an unexpected source: the Mughal court. In Warrior Ascetics and Indian Empires, historian William R. Pinch relates an odd occurrence. In 1567, while returning from a hunting expedition, the young Mughal Emperor Akbar found himself near Thanesar, where two bands of warrior ascetics were about to come to blows over camping rights. The weaker band appealed to Akbar for support, and he attempted to reason with the disputants. This failed, and the ascetics started a battle. When the weaker band were about to be overwhelmed, Akbar ordered his troops to step in and routed the stronger side. Now, it's a matter of debate who these ascetics were. Some say they were Hindus and Muslims, some say they were Shaivites and Vaishnavites, but the incident stayed with Akbar, who developed a fascination with yogis that was continued by his successors. Like earlier Gangetic monarchs, Akbar also turned to Prayagraj into a center of his authority. He expanded the city there, naming it Allahabad or Allahabad, both city of God and city of the gods, to appeal to his diverse Hindu and Muslim subjects, and he also lifted pilgrim taxes and made endowments to various Hindu holy orders, while personally visiting and consulting with yogis on occult matters. The city's annual Kumbh Mela boomed as a result. There are many documented instances of this Mela, but they aren't really called Kumbh Mela in any of the sources. Now, Prayagraj's increasingly prosperous Prayagwal or Pragwal Brahmins began to relate stories of how Akbar was in fact a Hindu ascetic in his previous birth. Generally speaking, the Mughals continued to encourage yogis who didn't fit into our modern categories of Hindu and Muslim. Even Aurangzeb, according to a letter from the 1660s cited by Pinch, wrote respectfully to the Delhi-based yogi Anandnath to source Mercury. This Mughal engagement with yogis had other unexpected consequences. Benefiting from Mughal trade networks as well as the empire's endless demand for military manpower, Shaivite yogis emerged as traders cum warlords. As Mughal power declined in the late 18th century, Shaivite yogis became the arbiters of North India's destiny, bearing Mughal-granted titles. The most remarkable of these was Himmat Bahadur Anupgiri Gosain, who commanded an army of over 10,000 troops in the late 18th century. Melas at pilgrimage sites offered men like Anupgiri lucrative markets and pliant devotees. This led yogi orders to compete for the right to bathe in rivers before others, displaying both their power and their holiness. More importantly, yogi orders also struggled to control Mela markets with disastrous results. In Haridwar in 1760, according to historian James Lochtefeld in God's Gateway, The History and Development of a Pilgrim Center, Shaivite and Vaishnavite ascetics fought a battle which killed 18,000 people. While that's definitely an exaggerated number, the Vaishnavite ascetics ended up being banned from Haridwar for some time, and the Shaivite yogi orders made a killing by trading in silk, spices, and other valuable goods. As late as 1790, Nawab Asaf-ud-Daula of Awadh, a successor to Mughal authority in Prayagraj, was trying to keep pilgrim taxes low. But as historian Kama MacLean writes in Pilgrimage and Power, the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, all this changed with the ascent of the East India Company in the region, which was due to the assistance of the yogi warlord Anupgiri Gosain. Unfortunately, the British were much more paranoid about warrior ascetics than the Mughals and stripped them of their mercenary and trading functions and reduced most of them to vagrants. The company's paranoia also extended to various petty rulers who visited Prayagraj with armed retinues. Seeking to crack down or at least profit from pilgrimage, they raised pilgrim taxes to the delight of British missionary organizations. But this alienated the city's Pragwal Brahmins, who joined the mutinous 6th Native Infantry in the 1857 uprising. The British then wreaked their ire on the Pragwals, driving many of them into penury. Pragwals and ascetics had made their livings in Prayagraj from pilgrimage, and clearly the British were there to stay, so something had to change. This was to effectively rebrand the city's annual Kumbh Mela into a massive 12-yearly Kumbh Mela, organized in collaboration with the colonial state. This required a series of innovations. For one, as historian Manu Pillai has argued in Gods, Guns and Missionaries, The Making of the Modern Hindu Identity, the British understood Hinduism primarily through the lens of Christian ideas, which is to say they accorded primacy to text, not to practice. If something was in a Sanskrit text, it was real Hinduism, otherwise it was degenerate and could be disposed of. So Pragwals produced Sanskrit texts such as the Kumbha Parvan, studied by scholar R.B. Bhattacharya in a 1977 edition of Hindutva magazine. These texts declared that the nectar from the churning of the ocean had fallen from a pot or kumbha at Prayagraj, leading to the eternal celebration of the Kumbh Mela. They also declared the fort to be a Triveni, a confluence of the Ganga, Yamuna and Saraswati rivers, while ubiquitous today the term Triveni actually appears first only in 1873. The revered Hindi scholar Pandit Lakshmidhar Malviya remarked dryly that Prayagraj's Prayagwal Brahmins dug a 500-mile-long tunnel to take the Saraswati to Prayag. Now, all of this also coincided with the explosion in Hindi printed media, much of which was devotional. And finally, all of this reconciled the British to the idea of a large pilgrim gathering at Prayagraj under their control. The British lifted the pilgrim tax and then undertook a series of massive organizational infrastructural works to ensure pilgrim safety. They negotiated with ascetic orders to determine their order of bathing, reducing these fearsome weapons to largely ceremonial props. Then, with mobility boosted by British railways, millions of middle-class Indians, won over by print media, began to congregate at Prayagraj. Many wrote approvingly of British efforts and came away with a feeling of new spirituality, feelings that directly contributed to a new Hindu identity and ripened in time into nationalist sentiment. Indeed, as avowed rationalist as Jawaharlal Nehru declared Prayagraj to be a place of timeless spirituality and had a handful of his ashes immersed there. Now, the point of all of this isn't to refute the tremendous power of belief that even now brings tens of millions of people to Prayagraj. Instead, I want to argue that the contours of belief, the banks that contain its torrent, are shaped by historical forces. Hinduism is often seen directly as a result of British Orientalism as an unchanging and eternal entity. But in Hinduism's endless capacity for innovation, to evolve alongside powerful and contradictory forces, lies its power to create such extraordinary phenomena as the Kumbh Mela, the greatest gathering on earth. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram @AnarBuddha and on Twitter @AKanisati. We'll see you next week.